Tamar-Kali, thank you so much for chatting with me. I'm super excited to talk with you about your projects. You have multiple projects that were at Sundance, and I can't wait to get more of your perspective on that. But to start, I want to hear about your experience. Can you tell me about how Sundance went for you this year?
So, Sundance was a bust. Well, in terms of travel.
Oh
So,
no.
yeah. So this would have been my fifth time attending, and I really wanted to be there for the last hurrah in Park City, but
Mhm.
unfortunately, my Delta flight did not make it to Salt Lake
Oh.
City, and it was unbelievable. It was beyond shocking. Just I could barely make it home. It was perilous. It was just unbelievable. And yeah.
Mm.
So, and this was the first time I had experienced anything like that.
Hmm.
And so it was, I was happy to be have my work in the festival, of course.
Hmm.
But I was so sad to miss being with the crew
Hmm.
for the premieres.
Dang, what a bummer. But as you mentioned, you've been to Sundance before, and so I'm happy you've had the Park City experience at least before it leaves Park City. But yeah, let's talk about your career. So, if I'm not mistaken, your first time at Sundance was for Pariah.
That's right. My
Yeah.
first time, it was, it cracks me up when I think about the trajectory because my first time at Sundance was as a performer at the ASCAP Music Cafe. I was an ASCAP writer at that time, and you know. When I worked with Dee on that, that was our first time getting to know each other. There's no score for that film. She just used all diegetic music. And then there was a soundtrack, of course. And so I literally was there to perform with my band. So it was like a gig, and a rock gig at that for me. Had no idea what was on the horizon and what would be to come for she and I as collaborating artists and just my future as a film score composer. No clue.
Yeah, it seems like quite the journey for you. And so, kind of walk me through that evolution up to these projects, which we'll talk about in just a moment.
hmm So, previous to Pariah, my only experience with film in terms of like participating would be the documentary Afropunk, where I was one of five featured artists. And in addition to being in the film, I actually, toured with the director to get footage. I was like the boom sound person because it was DIY, and I knew the director from when since we were kids in the scene here in New York City. So that was like my film experience up to that point. And then coming on to Pariah, performing with my band in the film, and then having this connection to the soundtrack. That would be the second time I was on a soundtrack. But Pariah brought me into the space of film in a way that I wouldn't say for Afropunk because it was a super DIY kind of scenario. Um, and basically, Pariah opened the door for Dee and I to get to know each other. And she became more familiar with my work and the range of my work, not just like my five-piece rock band, but the work I did as a music director. And I also had a chamber ensemble that I've had since 1988. And it was through her learning about the chamber ensemble and these other ways that I showed up around music, pardon me, that made her ask me to if I would be interested in scoring her Bessie Smith biopic, actually. And so at that time, I didn't have a reel, and I attempted to submit because I have a lot of respect and appreciation for Dee and her vision, but HBO didn't want to book sight unseen on her, and I get that. So I ended up just singing on that soundtrack. I did a Ma Rainey piece. And so these are like the little steps that it took. But that experience taught Dee something. And so when she got to Mudbound, she made sure that she was in a position and had the agency to choose the collaborators she wanted to. And that's how I ended up scoring Mudbound.
That's awesome. And now you're at festivals pretty regularly. It seems. I know the Fire Inside was at TIFF last year, and so yeah, this is kind of a scene that you're now just actively a part of, which is awesome.
Yeah, I mean, full fledged. I mean, I have been composing for years. It never occurred to me to actually compose film scores, but that to me is what made it authentic as this extension of my artistic practice, being able to collaborate across disciplines with other artists.
That's great. So let's start with Chasing Summer. This is the one that I have seen
Okay.
um, and thoroughly enjoyed. My husband and I are Eliza Schlesinger fans, and so
Oh,
we.
okay.
In fact, I didn't see it. I wanted to cover the red carpet, but I didn't because I told my husband I'd see the movie when I get home, and so we got to watch it together.
Okay. Oh,
Um,
that's so sweet. I, I do that too with, with
right.
with my hubs. I'm like, oh, I don't want to watch it by myself because we'll love this together.
Yeah, and so it was a fun experience for us both to have. But talk to me about your approach to this one. It's kind of it's a comedy,
Mhm.
but there's some emotionality to it. There's some self discovery with it, and a twist at the end. But like, talk to me about approaching this
I
story.
definitely consider it a summer fling dramedy,
Yes.
but but essentially, I mean, I have heard of Eliza Schlesinger, and I was excited when Josephine reached out to me about this. Pardon me. And I was like, oh, such an interesting turn, like nothing I would have put together. But definitely the thing about this film is that because of the nature of the film and the very like on the pulse of the time, there are a whole lot of needle drops. But working with Josephine Decker, she is an auteur, and she's going to have a painterly hand in whatever it is that she does. So I was just excited about an opportunity to work with Josephine Decker again because I felt like what we made with Shirley was just so special that of course I'm going to be a yes. So I did about a handful of cues, and for those cues it was really about her trying to pinpoint the psychological underpinnings of the scene. Because even though it's a summer fling dramedy, there are these really poignant moments about self-discovery and just you know, figuring out if we're living our true lives, like, just all the internal struggles you have about your habits, your pathology. There's stuff there, you know what I mean? And so those are the things we worked on. And, it's a string quartet, a little bit of electronic stuff to just kind of ground some of those more emotional moments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's very entertaining, by the way. So, well done there. Now, the one that I didn't have a chance to see, and I really want to, is Once Upon a Time in Harlem. And the interesting thing is that there's the Chasing Summer, which is narrative, and Harlem, which is documentary. Now,
Mhm.
of course, you've worked in both spaces. I'm kind of interested in your approach to Harlem, but also the differences between composing for narrative and for documentary.
So I started doing narrative work. That was my experience. The first documentary I ever scored was John Lewis Good Trouble. And for the most part, with the exception of I think one project, most of the documentary work I do is like what I call this part of my practice that I call ancestral work. For instance, the Little Richard I Am Everything. I also did something called After Sherman that was specific to my cultural identity as a Gullah Geechee person. So Once Upon a Time in Harlem sits very much in this canon of work that I'm trying to create in the documentary space. Um, this was such a blessing. Like literally, like I'm getting emotional thinking about it now. It's one of those angel projects, like super blessed project. Um, I happen to know Leonie Greaves, producer and granddaughter of William Greaves, and she reached out to me about continuing this work. Her father was continuing the work of her grandfather, and I had known Leonie, but I didn't realize what the namesake was. I didn't know her legacy. You know what I mean? It's like it wasn't that. We just were in community together. And so as soon as she told me what was going on, and I was like, absolutely, like it would be an honor and a privilege, and it also was a pleasure. Sometimes things are an honor and a privilege, and they're not a pleasure. But this was, and there's just so much the synergy around it. I actually have the same birthday as her grandfather,
Oh, okay.
my mother, and Liani's a Libra as well. There's just a lot of balance. It was like very super cosmic, and um, also in addition to just this kind of pathway in my artistic practice around ancestral work, this specifically around the Harlem Renaissance is a part of a larger body of work that I've been this place I've been uh, doing my own little scholarship on in terms of what I learned about the Harlem Renaissance, not so much in school, because I think that was just like Langston Hughes, that's it. But through, my family, because a lot of African American people, like most of the history you got, especially if you're Gen X, was at home, not in the school. But this particular piece, it's like a continuum of some work I've been doing starting in 2023 when I did a commission for LA Opera called We Hold These Truths. I set poetry of Paul Laurence Dunbar, Langston Hughes, and Claude McKay to music. Um, I just the 2 days after Sundance, I premiered a new piece called Pleasure Garden for quartet and soprano that's setting three poems from female poets from the Harlem Renaissance to music because the only woman that was ever mentioned in the context of the Harlem Renaissance was Zora Neale Hurston, and that is so not indicative of what was actually happening in Harlem at that time. This film shows you that. Um, and so, yeah, so I've been in this space doing this work and like predating the Harlem Renaissance and the new Negro movement. There's this moment in the late 1800s that seeds the movement into the new Negro movement. And I have a chamber opera about William Dorsey Swann, the first person to identify as a queen of drag who was formerly enslaved and lived in DC. So it's like this work has been swirling around me for a while. So when this project came up, I was like, absolutely. It just felt so like, like kismet, like, and I'm just so grateful. The project, Once Upon a Time in Harlem, is such a treasure trove. Like, I remember when I saw the first cut, and I was just so emotional because, to first of all, for him to have the vision to say, you know what? Because he's a student of the Harlem Renaissance and a filmmaker and a visionary, he's like, I'm going to bring all of these luminaries into this one room, these living luminaries. And when you think about how long ago the Harlem Renaissance was, I thought I would only engage with these people in text and still imagery. I never imagined that I would get to see Romare Bearden and like all these folks just like chopping it up and kicking it in Duke Ellington's apartment. Like it's such a treasure. And I keep saying to people like kind of like what the greatest night in pop did for fans of 80s pop. Like this is that for the Harlem Renaissance because you never thought that you would see this. And as the night goes on and the drinks keep flowing and people are being more their authentic selves and getting into it, having debates, like it's just and just all the characters, it's just I never thought I would be able to be a fly on the wall for this community of artists.
I am so bummed I have not seen this. I just want to have this conversation more with you. When I see it, let's get another conversation. Yeah,
Absolutely, because it's gonna turn you out. It is the best. It is the
yeah,
best. It feels so good.
that's awesome. And so the similarities and differences between narrative and documentary scoring.
So I'm like similarities and differences. Um, what I okay. So there's some like big block general things. Documentaries tend to be wall to wall music. That is not the case with Once Upon a Time in Harlem because of the rich subject matter, which is part of an artistic movement. And of course, there's music, right? So there were a lot of needle drops in that project as well. But because of the nature of the project and what the blessing that it was into the world for those of us who love American history and those of us who want to be able to trace our identities as artists today through our forebears, was struck with the idea that there needed to be an invocation and a benediction. And so we start with an opening piece. that is very indicative of like an orchestra tuning up, because I was thinking of these luminaries as their own orchestra, you know, and what they had to contribute, the way players in an orchestra can to contribute to a symphony, um, the parallel of their ideas, their particular discipline, and what they brought, you know, thinking of the Harlem Renaissance as this like, you know, experience in life, this tangible symphony in living. And then the end was the benediction. And so the thing about William Greaves is that he was a consummate artist himself. So he ends with a poem of his own. And the backdrop of Harlem, and like the shot, this very long shot of this beautiful child walking through the streets of Harlem in the 70s. So I was underscoring that is like two parts, um, working with his voice, and then the scenery in the last one. So yeah, so it's a benediction because we're kind of having this cumulative moment of thinking about what the Renaissance meant, not only to America, to culture, like what they gave, but also what it meant for them, these people who were coming into their own, and then the backdrop of Harlem. So that's how I worked with that. With narratives, usually you are, well, I like to create a musical arc that parallels the story arc. And you know, it can be in numerous things because it depends on the artist that you're working with, the filmmaker you're working with, what their relationship is to music, what their musical IQ is. So it can be so many different things. Like, and I feel like that's the part that people forget or don't know, that it could be pretty much anything you want it to be. And even when there's like studio and producers weighing in, you work with someone who has the skill to split the difference between what your ultimate artistic vision is and the container that you have, you know? So that's pretty much the same across. But in general, documentaries tend to be wall to wall music, whereas narratives, I wouldn't say that it's ornamental, but it has more, the reflection is more along that line as opposed to documentary. And I wonder why that is. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I don't think it's arbitrary, but I think it's like customary, and it's a culture that has developed around these forms. But of course, you know, some there are people who transgress and just do whatever the hell they want. You know what I mean, too. So it can be anything.
Hmm. I have to wrap up here in a moment, but I could talk to you for so long. Seriously, we need to get another conversation on the books.
Okay.
Um, but I want to end a little bit more with your experience, and I want to address more about representation in the industry, right? I mean, I'm going to say it, I haven't come across very many Black women composers before, and so I want to know more about that experience with you and how, um, how you've navigated the industry, um, and what challenges you may have encountered, but also what has helped you succeed.
I would say that the industry is not my strong suit. My practice is, you know, my art is. And I think that that's something important, um, to be really open about with people. And that's why it's so critical to work with people that you respect, that respect you, that you feel get you, so that if they've got the muscles for the industry, they can represent you in a light that is, you know, reflective of who you are, what you bring to the table. You know, I think that in getting older, I'm just like, hey, like my tenacity is for the practice, is for the art. That's what I'm interested in. In terms of representation, it's interesting because, you know, I'm Gen X, and I attended, you know, PWIs my entire, you know, institutional lifetime as a student. And so basically, especially parochial, predominantly white institutions. So I grew up Catholic. So essentially, everything I wanted to do and everything I wanted to be came from my soul. I never really thought about if there was anyone who looked like me who did it. You know, I mean, it's like when you think about me fronting a post hardcore band, being in punk rock, like, you know, and then being a composer. But I knew in my heart that I was not an anomaly in terms of the reality. It's just representation. And I think that people need to realize what that means when we say representation. It's not existence, right? And I think it's important for us to cultivate that curiosity to find out what's out there. And particularly when we are making statements about the best of. And so when you think about gender, you think about racial identity, if you are only representing like 30% of the population, how could you possibly imagine that you could find the best of what's out there when a larger part of the population isn't even being represented? It's like the math isn't mathing. Like, I don't even want to get into, I don't want to police people's thoughts, hearts, and minds. You know what I mean? I just want to talk about the math. And if you're only representing like 30% of the population, how could you possibly be getting the best of what the world has to offer? Arithmetic.
That's a great response, and I love that insight, and I love talking with you. Tamar-Kali, thank you again so much for this conversation.
Oh,
If you don't mind, I'd love to keep up with you on social media, and yeah, I'll be following whatever you're doing. I'm looking forward to seeing you at whatever festival you end up at next.
thank you. Have a great afternoon.